Many thanks for joining me. On the news, 3 killed, 30 injured in Jenin camp raid. Thailand seeks to re-engage Myanmar's junta. Blinken takes measures to boost U.S.-China ties. Australia paves way for a historic referendum, and Moscow stops UN aid for dam collapse victims. Stay with me for these and more stories. Israeli forces have attacked the Jenin refugee camp, killing 3 Palestinians and wounding at least 30. The raid started early Monday morning with Israeli soldiers storming the camp, firing live ammunition, stun grenades and toxic gas, according to reports. One of the Palestinians killed is a minor. The Palestinian Ministry of Health has identified the victim as Khalid Darwish, 21, Qassam Syria, 19, and Ahmed Sakwar, 15. The military said the raid was to arrest 2 suspects and that Israeli soldiers came under fire, which resulted in a massive exchange of fire. One of the suspects they were after was the son of an imprisoned Hamas leader, reports said from West Jerusalem. As the Israeli military vehicles were exiting the camp, the army statement said a military vehicle was hit by an explosive device, damaging the vehicle, after which military helicopters shot towards the gunmen to help the forces exit. Thailand is set to host talks aimed at re-engaging Myanmar's shunned military leaders, and an initiative critics said undermine regional unity on the strife-torn country's deadlock crisis. The outgoing Thai military-backed government, in a statement released on Sunday, said the purpose of its informal dialogue is to discuss a range of topics to complement the efforts by the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, to resolve the situation in Myanmar. It said the meeting will be attended by representatives from Laos, Cambodia, India, China, Brunei, and Vietnam, as well as Myanmar. Highly contentious issue between ASEAN leaders had agreed to exclude the country's general from the 10-member bloc's meetings. Myanmar's generals, who seized power in a 2021 coup after toppling the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi, have failed to honor a deal agreed with ASEAN 2 months afterwards to end the violence and initiate talks with groups opposed to their power grab. The Thai invitation to ASEAN foreign ministers, published on Twitter by Human Rights Watch, said the meeting will discuss a proposal for the regional bloc to fully re-engage Myanmar at the leaders' level. Myanmar's military-appointed foreign minister Than Shwe is due to join the talks, 2 sources with knowledge of the meeting said, according to reports. On politics, Antony Blinken, United States Secretary of State, has met China's top diplomat Wang Yi in Beijing as the 2 countries take steps to repair their strained relationship. The duo proposed for a photo on Monday at Beijing's Duarte State Guest House before heading into diplomatic talks. It is still unclear if Blinken will meet Chinese President Xi Jinping later in the day before he concludes his 2-day trip to the country and flies back to London. The meeting with Wang Yi follows a similar meetup between Blinken and Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang on Sunday, which the U.S. State Department described as a candid, substantive and constructive effort to maintain open channels of communication. With talks lasting more than 7 hours, Blinken also invited Qin Gang to the U.S. on a follow-up trip to maintain high-level contact between Chinese and American officials. The Chinese readout of the meeting was also largely positive and said that both sides agreed to increase commercial flights between China and the U.S., as well as encourage more people-to-people exchanges through student, academic, and business groups. It also mentioned Xi and U.S. President Joe Biden's meeting in Bali last year, when both leaders promised to take more concrete action to improve communication. While Blinken's trip has so far been largely symbolic, it does appear to have gone well given the relatively low expectations around it, said Bonnie Glaser, the managing director of the German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific program. Given the deep mistrust in the relationship so far, the visit has gone better than expected. There was 0 chance of a breakthrough. We can only hope for baby steps towards a new modus vivendi in the relationship, said by email, report said. Blinken was originally set to visit China in February, but his trip was delayed by the discovery of an alleged Chinese spy balloon flying over the U.S. and collecting information on domestic military sites. His trip is the most senior by a U.S. official to China since 2019, thanks in part to COVID-19 travel restrictions, and follows several months of increased contact between top U.S. and Chinese officials abroad and by virtual meeting. Biden said over the weekend that he hopes to meet Xi again in the coming months, an event that will probably take place at the annual summit of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC grouping in California later this year. Australia's parliament has passed legislation to pave the way for a historic referendum on Aboriginal rights, with voters set to decide if the Indigenous population gets a dedicated voice in national policy making. In a final vote in the Senate, the upper house, 52 voted in favor of the bill while 19 voted against. The referendum will ask Australians whether they support altering the constitution to include a voice to parliament, a committee that can advise the parliament on matters affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people in Australia. Parliament passed laws, but it's people that make the history, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said in a news conference after the bill was passed. The referendum is expected before the end of the year, although Albanese has yet to set a date for it. This is your time, your chance, your opportunity to be a part of making history, he added. Aboriginal Australians represent about 3% of Australia's population of nearly 26 million people, but make up more than a quarter of its prison population, according to official data, with many jailed for minor crimes. About one-third of Indigenous Australians, thousands of whom were killed after the British arrived in Australia and took control of the land under the concept of terra nullius, a Latin legal term for a land belonging to no one, live below the poverty line. If the referendum is passed, Indigenous Australians whose ancestors have lived in the continent for at least 60,000 years will be recognized in the Constitution for the first time. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders will also gain a constitutionally enshrined right to be consulted by the government on laws that affect their communities. Polls show majority backing for the so-called voice to parliament, but support is slipping as the debate becomes increasingly acrimonious. Senators supporting the bill clapped and cheered as the final numbers were read out. Now, Russia has refused United Nations offers to assist people in Russian-occupied areas affected by flooding from the collapsed Novokatvorka Dam. The dam was breached on June 6, unleashing a wave of water from the Dnipro River on communities across southern Ukraine, including Russian-occupied parts of the Kherson region. The floods damaged homes and farmland, forced the evacuation of numerous polluted supplies of drinking water, and triggered fears of environmental disaster. The United Nations urged Russia to act in accordance with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Denise Brown, United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, said in a statement on Sunday that the UN will continue to do all it can to reach all people, including those suffering as a result of the recent dam destruction, who urgently need life-saving assistance no matter where they are. Aid cannot be denied to people who need it. The death toll from the disaster has risen to 52, with Russian officials saying 35 people had died in areas under its control, and Ukraine's Interior Ministry saying 17 had died and 31 were missing. Over 11,000 people have been evacuated on both sides. Ukraine accuses Russia of blasting up the Soviet-era dam, which has been under Russian control since the early days of its full-scale invasion in 2022. A team of international legal experts assisting Ukraine's prosecutors in their probe said it was highly likely the dam's collapse was caused by explosive planted by the Russians. Moscow has accused Ukraine of causing the dam breach, but the several Russian allegations, including that it was hit by a missile, failed to account for a blast so strong that it registered on seismic monitors in the region. The massive flooding that followed the explosion came as Ukraine was planning to launch its counter-offensive, and the Dnipro River forms the front line. And here are more stories. North Korea says botched launch gravest failure. According to reports, top North Korean officials have vowed to try a second time to unveil a military spy satellite, calling their country's first and botched launch last month their gravest failure this year. The pledge came at a ruling Workers' Party of Korea meeting held between Friday and Sunday, according to more reports on Monday. The enlarged plenary meeting ordered workers and researchers to analyze the failed launch and heavily criticized those in charge of the botched operation. North Korea tried to put its first military spy satellite into orbit on May 31st, but the projectile and its payload crashed into the sea shortly after being launched due to what Pyongyang said was a rocket failure. The crash posted a setback to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's push to obtain a space-based surveillance system to better monitor the United States and South Korea. Washington and Seoul criticized the May 31st launch, saying it violated United Nations resolutions banning Pyongyang from any tests using ballistic missile technology. Analysts have said there is a significant technological overlap between the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles and space launch capabilities. Report did not say precisely when North Korea might attempt a second launch, but South Korea's spy agency earlier told legislators that it would take more than several weeks for Pyongyang to determine what went wrong with the first effort. South Korea said in recent days it has successfully recovered a large chunk of the crashed rocket from the seabed. Seoul had been working for over 2 weeks to recover the wreckage as the debris could assist scientists again insight into Pyongyang's ballistic missile and satellite surveillance programs. In African scenes, vote collation underway in Mali for a new structure. In Bamako, Mali, polling stations close at 6 p.m. UTC on Sunday, June 18th to commence vote tally. During the day, citizens had voted on a new constitution. Major changes in new draft constitution include firming up the president's powers, reforming constitutions, or recognizing traditional authorities. Some 8.4 million citizens were eligible to vote in the referendum. The danger of jihadist attacks was a consideration in central and northern regions, meaning the vote was not held in some parts of the country, including the town of Kila, a stronghold of former rebels. A team of observers from civil society groups backed by the European Union reported that there were only a small number of voting issues in the polling stations to which they were deployed. They also reported that over 80 polling units in Mopti, in the center of the country, were not open due to insecurity, adding that a terrorist attack had disrupted voting in Bodio but did not give further details. In Menaka, a northern region contending with rebels linked to the Islamic State group, voting was limited to its capital due to insecurity, local elected officials said. Political disagreement also reportedly prevented voting in some areas. Turnout typically was low in the country of 21 million. This will be seen as an indicator of the junta's ability to restore stability and generate popular enthusiasm for its agenda. Colonel Assimi Goita, transitional leader who supports a yes vote in the draft constitution, cast his ballot in the garrison town of Kati. He said the new constitution will pave the way towards a new, strong and efficient Mali at the service of the population's well-being. The junta had advertised the new constitution as the answer to Mali's inability to tackle its several crises. Goita, who seized power in 2020, has promised to return the country to civilian rule in 2024. He called the Malians to remain united whatever the outcome of the referendum may be. Results are anticipated within 72 hours. Let's take a short break. When I come back, I'll bring you more stories. Stay with us. Here are more stories. Still talking fuel subsidy in Nigeria. Labour threatens strike yet again. Ahead of talks between the federal government and the organized Labour plan to hold today, the Nigeria Labour Congress has said the government must meet its demands to cushion the effect of the fuel subsidy removal. The union threatened it will not waver to call out workers for industrial action, adding that it only halted its planned strike. It stated that the high cost of fuel was causing unbearable hardship on Nigerians, adding that the government must act fast with respect to providing palliatives, as the NLC said it was anticipating a surge in the minimum wage from 30,000 naira to 150,000 naira. On June 5, 2023, the federal government and labor unions met with a resolution to reconvene on June 19th to agree on the implementation framework of the resolutions reached. Femi Gbajabiamila, the ex-speaker of the House of Representatives and present chief of staff to the president, who led the government side, had revealed this at the end of the meeting between Labour and government representatives at the presidential villa in Abuja. According to him, the June 5th meeting agreed on a 7-point resolution to bolster the impact of the subsidy removal on premium motor spirit, popularly called petrol, on Nigerians. He said, and I quote, the federal government, the TUC and the NLC to establish a joint committee to review the proposal for any wage increase or award and establish a framework and timeline for implementation. The federal government, the TUC and the NLC to review the World Bank Finance Cash Transfer Scheme and propose the inclusion of low-income earners in the program. the federal government and the TUC, the NLC, to revive the CNG conversion program earlier agreed with labor centers in 2021 and work out detailed implementation and timing, Bajamia Mila said in a statement. And finally, on the news, anxiety as new electricity tariff due July 1st. Nigerians may need to brace up for harsher times as electricity tariff is set to increase by over 40% in the coming days, a development which may eventually end all forms of energy subsidy in the country. With a monthly subsidy of about 50 billion naira still in the electricity sector owing to revenue shortfall, the tariff spike due from July 1st may be another acid test for the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration's market reform. The administration has already removed subsidies on premium motor spirit PMS and floated the naira, decisions that have complicated the price setting of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission NERC 2022 multi-year tariff order MYTO. Although the power sector players have been unable to meet the threshold of supplying at least 5,000 megawatts a year after signing contracts with NERC's present service-based tariff CBT was benchmarked on an exchange rate of 441 naira per dollar and inflation of 16.97%. Going by the NERC's orders in 2015, the average tariff across distribution companies, discos, and classes of end users was 25 kilowatt in order of 198 per 2022, which came into effect on September 1st, 2020. The average tariff went to 60 naira per kilowatt in MYTO for 2022. The average tariff was 64 naira across classes of customers. The foreign exchange rate used in determining the 2015 tariff was 198.97 naira per dollar, and 383.80 naira per dollar was used in 2020, while 441.78 naira per dollar was used in 2022. The inflation used in the 2015 MYTO was 8.3%, 12% was used in 2020, and 16.97% in 2022. At present, the inflation rate is 22.41%, and some experts have estimated that it will hit 30% by the end of June, given the floating of the naira and subsidy removal on PMS. Coming as the metering gap remain at over 7 million, gas prices, losses, and actual generation capacity are other elements in determining the tariff. While NERC's projected tariff for July 2023 was anticipated to remove subsidy and add the form of frozen tariff B and D and E, hiking the bands from 54.59 kilowatt to 62.16 naira for band D and 48.37 naira per kilowatt to 61.16 naira on average, with an average addition across the bands moving to 67 naira per kilowatt. The prevailing floating of the naira and sparking inflation is projected to move the new average tariff to about 8 naira per kilowatt for the sector to recover the cost. Most stakeholders said, according to reports, that while the surge is unavoidable due to the changes in the perimeters, households and small businesses, which should power the economy, may head for serious problems, with energy costs alone rising to over 70% as purchasing power remains a challenge in the face of unemployment and poverty. Available electricity on the grid stood at 3,057.7 megawatts from 17 power plants at the time of writing this report. The average load intake of all discos in the last 4 months averaged 3,000 megawatts, a development that follows the persistent push to make the discos meet up with 100% of their remittance orders. With the question of affordability appearing as a major consideration, the grid remains undependable, forcing it to make losses. Stakeholders have voiced worries that Nigerian electricity supply market may face harder times managing outlook due to apathy that may come from consumers who are losing hope in the system and resorting to alternative energy. Professor Wumi Iledere, energy expert, said the restructuring of the forex market creates fears as it appears as a devaluation of the naira, adding that he's not comfortable blaming subsidy removal and paying the right tariff for decoupling Nigeria's economy from forex instability. People must support the government in its effort to stop the dollarization of its economy. even if electricity tariff and petroleum product prices rise to a not too comfortable market clearing price, according to him. However, Iladari questioned the present energy pricing in the country, adding that the PMS pricing which stated after the NMPC announcement is anti-competitive based on the dominant firm market structure. Executive Director at Power Up Initiatives for Electricity Rights, Power Up Nigeria, Adetayo Adegbemle said, while increasing tariff appears normal due to the prevailing situation, there is a need to review the whole process and encourage basing the electricity tariff against the Naira going forward. A recap of major stories says 3 killed, 30 injured in Jenin camp raid. Thailand seeks to re-engage Myanmar's junta. Blinken takes measures to boost U.S.-China ties. Australia paves way for a historic referendum. And Moscow stops UN aid for dam collapse victims. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Turaki. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a beautiful week ahead.